Good evening. My name is Karen Alworth, and I'd like to welcome you here this evening to the 5th Annual Martha Alworth Memorial Lecture. Each year, we select one of the speakers from the series to honor the memory of Martha. We find a topic that would speak to her personally or something that she would have been particularly interested in. And tonight's speaker is Andrew Hoffman. Andrew, no pressure here now. I had the honor of being Martha's daughter-in-law for over 30 years and her friend. She was a mentor, a role model, and truly a citizen of Duluth and the world at large. Martha was, Martha was a driving force behind the establishment of a series of lectures on peace and justice back in the 1980s, and it is because of her and her family that the Alworth Center for the Study of Peace and Justice is here at St. Scholastica, supporting events like tonight's program. Our focus this year is sustainability. And on this theme, I'd like to share with you a couple of quick stories about Martha. Both of them are true, and neither of them are a mother-in-law joke. Regarding sustainability, two definitions come to mind. First is the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. One day, shortly before Martha's 80th birthday, she asked my husband, Royal, "Dear, I'm concerned about my carbon footprint. Do you think I need to get one of those new Prius cars that everybody's talking about?" Royal, always the diplomat, paused for a few seconds before replying, "Well, Mom, I think it's a good idea to do what you can to reduce your carbon footprint. But you do realize, Mom, you live in an awfully big house." Now, Martha's house wasn't only big, it was huge. It was 10,000 square feet. It had 7 bedrooms, and each bedroom had its own bathroom, and she lived there by herself. Well, maybe a Prius would make a difference. Maybe not in the way she thought. And we each need to do our own part, but moving out of that house was not a sacrifice Martha was willing to make. Second definition of sustainability, the avoidance of the depletion of resources. Martha was always very involved in the Duluth community, a lifelong member of the League of Women Voters, political action groups, book clubs, peace and justice committees, and, as my father-in-law fondly called them, her various ban the bomb groups. Martha was generous, opening her home to group meetings, and was always very much the hostess. There was one particularly busy week where she had meetings at her house 3 days in a row. And as you might guess, with a city the size of Duluth, some of the members of these groups were there in her home 3 days in a row. On the 3rd day, Martha was serving treats to all of her guests, cookies, bars, and one of her guests turned to her and asked, "Martha, how do you do it? You have 6 children at home and your husband who loves sweets, yet you always seem to have treats to serve at these meetings. How do you manage to keep your family from eating everything?" Well, Martha said with a smile on her face, "I carefully wrap up all the leftovers, first in tin foil, and then I wrap them in butcher paper. But before putting them away in the freezer, I label them liver." Works every time. Nobody ever opens that package. Again, thank you very much for being here this evening, and now I'll turn the podium over to my friend and the director of the Alworth Center for the Study of Peace and Justice, Tom Morgan. Thank you.
Wow, it just occurred to me, in doing this for 28 years, I think, it's the first time I've ever been introduced to anything here, so that was a thrill too. Yes, as Karen said or alluded, this is the fifth in a series of programs dealing with sustainable living. These lectures, as Karen said, are sponsored principally by the Alworth Center for the Study of Peace and Justice at the College of St. Scholastica, and funded in part by the Warner Lecture Series of the Manitou Fund, the DeWitt and Carolyn Van Ivre Foundation, and by Mary C. Van Ivre in memory of William Van Ivre, a former trustee of the college. Additional support has been received from the Global Awareness Fund of the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation, Wagner Zahn Architecture, the Royal D. Alworth Junior Institute at the University of Minnesota in Duluth, the UMD Department of Languages and Cultures, Reader Weekly of Duluth, Citizens Climate Lobby, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, and from numerous other private sources. What a list, and my gratitude to all these sponsors for helping support these things. Thank you very much. And this is, originally in my plan, this was going to be the final lecture in the series, but thanks to the support in particular from Citizens Climate Lobby and Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, there will be a sixth lecture, April 26th, by Eric Enberg, locally, a local fellow, preparing Duluth for the coming age of carbon pricing. So put that on your calendar, April 26th, another lecture in this series. While I'm in the mode of promoting things, I should say on Sunday night on this stage this week at 6 p.m. we are going to have a forum here featuring all the candidates. I believe they're all going to be here for the 8th Congressional District, the ones who are running for Rick Nolan's seat. And they'll be here on Sunday night to answer your questions and talk about their own political agendas. And that's at 6 p.m. Sunday night. One last thing to promote. Thursday, April 21st, this is our Catholic Studies Department project, Climate Crisis and Benedict's Model, by Sister Ann McCarthy of the Erie Benedictines for Peace, that's Erie, Pennsylvania. So those are programs that are coming up. If you want to be on our mailing list and hear more about this in writing or by email, there are sign-up sheets out in the lobby to do that, and there are a couple of other organizations too that have information for you. Tomorrow night, as we do for all of these lectures, we'll have a talk-back session here at the college, led by Rachel Wagner, at 7 p.m. Wednesday evening, and all the information about that is right here. I invite you to come to that. We get to talk about Andrew Hoffman in his absence, led by Rachel, and her credentials and her background are right there, so she'll be conducting that. After the talk, tonight's talk, of course, we have microphones for you to ask questions, and I hope you do. That's always interesting, and if students want to ask questions, I ask you to defer to them first and foremost, because they're really why we're here, aren't they? On the screens on either side of me, we are displaying the text of tonight's lecture through technology called real-time captioning. Although we anticipate a high-quality format, there will inevitably be errors that are inherent to this technology. Nevertheless, I think it's very useful for you, and a special thank you to the Edwin H. Eddy Foundation, whose generous support makes this inclusive service possible again tonight. And speaking of technology, if you have any technology in your pocket or purse, now would be a good time to shut it off so we can give our attention to the speaker. Our speaker this evening is the Holcim Professor of Sustainable Enterprise at the University of Michigan, a position that holds joint appointments in the Ross School of Business and the Sustainable Systems Group at the School of Environment and Sustainability at Ann Arbor. Professor Hoffman has a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Massachusetts, a master's degree and in civil and environmental engineering, and a PhD in both management and civil and environmental engineering from MIT. His research uses organizational behavior models and theories to understand the cultural and institutional aspects of environmental issues for organizations. He's published more than 100 articles and book chapters, as well as 14 books, which have been translated into 5 languages. 2 of those books will be on sale after the talk, and both of those books will be in English. His list of honors includes the Aspen Institute Faculty Pioneer Award, the American Chemical Society National Award, the Strategic Organization Best Essay Award, and the Organization and Environment Best Paper Award, and those are only the honors he's earned in the last couple of years. His work has been covered in numerous media outlets, including the New York Times, Scientific American, Time, the Wall Street Journal, National Geographic, Atlantic, and National Public Radio. He served on numerous research committees for the National Academies of Science, the Johnson Foundation, the Climate Group, the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development, and on the Environmental Defense Fund. Prior to academics, Professor Hoffman worked for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Metcalf and Eddy Environmental Consultants, T&T Construction and Design, and the Amoco Corporation. Currently serves on advisory boards for Eco America, Next Era Renewable Energy Trust, Sustainability, the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, the Center for Environmental Innovation, and the Stanford Social Innovation Review. In his spare time, and I think he has some, he tells me, Professor Hoffman enjoys carpentry in a big way, takes it very seriously, and he also plays golf and looks after his 1960 MG and his 1952 Chevy pickup. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Andrew Hoffman.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to begin my remarks with a confession, a very unusual confession, and that is that I keep an email folder for climate skeptic hate mail. I get it quite regularly, and I would ask you who gets it, much less saves it. I do. The emails began in 2010 when I first began to write about the sociology and psychology of why people reject the science of climate change. Some of the emails are mild, some are incomprehensible, and many are hostile. For example, one gentleman wrote, AGW is a Nazi eugenical depopulationary Rockefeller scam. Now, I know AGW is anthropogenic global warming. I'm not sure about what the rest means, but to make sure that I understood what he was trying to say or his intent, he did conclude it by calling me scum. Most are clear that there is no such thing as man-made global warming. It's quite possibly the largest fraud in human history. And many also wonder why ideologues like myself want to force the United States to lower its standard of living, de-develop the world, or bring about the Marxist destruction of civilization. And that last email opened with the appropriate greetings, comrade. And then some are bluntly threatening. Please, by all means, just kill yourself. Sorry you have such an empty life, but I'm going to get it gets a lot worse from here, count on it. Some of my colleagues see these emails as a badge of honor, a signal that I'm saying something important. As the adage goes, if you're not offending anyone, you never took a stand. As anyone who gets emails like this knows, or any kind of mail like this knows, it stings at first, and over time you start to get used to it. Now, as I look back, I should have been expecting this kind of reaction had I been more versed in the toxicity of the climate change debate in this country. But I came into it a rather naive person to engage in the conversation. These negative emails left me perplexed. Why would someone send angry messages like these to someone they don't know over a scientific issue? And that's what sent me down a path of articles and books and speaking to try and understand what is going on here. And what I've learned through this work and the work of many others is that for people like this, the reason the climate change debate has become so toxic is that it is about very important values that people feel are threatened by the acceptance of climate change. The public debate over climate change debate in this country right now in many ways is not about CO2, it's not about climate modeling, it's about conflicting worldviews. And it's about different values that people hold dear that they feel are threatened, whether it's fear of economic disaster, increased government regulation and a loss of freedom, a carbon price, distrust of scientists, distrust of environmentalists, distrust of democratic politicians. All of this feeds the conversation. There's one value that is threatened that I think is the most perplexing for some to understand, but it is also the most important for coming to terms with society's impact on climate change. And that is the threat to our religious beliefs. There are many people out there that have trouble accepting the idea of climate change because it threatens their notion of God. One person wrote that I think I'm doing good, but I must be doing the work of Satan. Or another wrote that I must be a secular evolutionist. How could I possibly believe in climate change and believe in God? The two are mutually separate. In fact, Rush Limbaugh devoted an entire episode of his show to say that you cannot believe in climate change and you're not going to believe in God at the same time. This is a vibrant strand in the climate debate, and if nothing else gets you to see that this is not just about CO2 and climate models, this should do it. If you are engaging someone at the Christmas dinner table, that brother or sister, that uncle or aunt, who says that climate change is a hoax, and you do what most people do and you whip out your PowerPoint deck and start to give them more science, and what they're hearing is a threat to their belief in God, you are talking right past each other. And this should give you a sense of what is really at play and at stake in this debate. For some people, the very thought that humans have become so powerful that we can alter the global climate is hubris. We are not in charge out there. God is in charge out there, and we live by divine providence. I get more than hate mail. I've actually gotten heckled at talks. I gave a talk once, and at the end of it, someone held up a Bible, yelling at me, saying, God promised Noah he would never flood the earth again. How can the seas be rising? I gave a talk once where a woman came up to me, quite concerned. She came from a very conservative religious family who looked at the climate change through the lens of Revelations. And if Revelations is going to bring about the end of the world through fire, and climate change looks like it's going to be bringing out the world through the end of the world through fire, maybe this is God's will. Why resist it? How do you answer a question like that? How do you respond to that? I did my best. I said, isn't that the same as saying, well, we're all going to eventually die someday, so why not take a gun and put a bullet to your head? Now, that didn't seem to work. I said, well, maybe climate change affects the world's poor, those that didn't do this more than others. Isn't this the same as persecuting the poor? She seemed mollified to a certain level, but I knew that I was pushing back against millennia of religious belief and the strength of her family's values. And I, a professor from the University of Michigan, is not going to do that in one engagement, nor am I going to do that in a short period of time. And that's the lesson I draw from that element of this conversation. If we're going to truly deal with climate change, it has to be embedded within our deepest values about who we are and why we are here. In short, it must be embedded in our religious values and our personal philosophy. People must take it on as connected to who they are, their purpose, and meaning in life. This will take a long time, and anything short of changing our beliefs and the culture we hold dear will fall short of addressing the climate challenge. And if there's nothing else I want you to take from tonight, it is the magnitude of the cultural shift we face. That's the big issue when we think about climate change and much more. When I think about this, I think about Aldo Leopold. If anyone's read a Sand County Almanac, he wrote this book in 1949, and this line has always stuck with me. No important change in ethics has ever been accomplished without an internal change in our intellectual emphasis, loyalties, affections, and convictions. The proof that conservation has not yet touched these foundations of conduct lies in the fact that philosophy and religion have not yet heard of it. In our attempt to make conservation easy, we have made it trivial. Well, I believe that in our attempt to make climate change easy, we have made it trivial. We're looking for simple answers that are palatable, generally framing the issue in the language of commerce. We count carbon emissions and we look to the decreasing price of solar cells and the increasing market value of Tesla as measures that we're making progress, and we get excited. But to my mind, the idea of making the business case to address climate change sounds as absurd as making the business case not to commit suicide. It's that simple. And yet that is how we're trying to change our culture, one consumer transaction at a time, and it won't work. While free marketers and technology entrepreneurs may think otherwise, there is no technological silver bullet to solving our environmental crisis. While critical in the short term, Elon Musk and the power of the market alone will not save us in the long term. The solution of the climate problem is not our technology, economy, or policy. Those are merely the proximate cause. The source of the problem is our beliefs and values that define their purpose and form. Without changes at that level, we will never recover from the destructive path on which we are embarked. So really, to address climate change, we have to connect concern with the environment with our deeper sense of what we care about. We will only protect what we love, not just what we measure monetarily. And there's the rub. When will we move from a question of making the business case to address climate change to a different question that Dwayne Elgin posed in 2012? When will humanity express its moral outrage that it is wrong to devastate an entire planet for countless generations to come just to satisfy the consumer desires of a fraction of humanity for a single lifetime? And if you don't know that fraction of humanity that's satisfying their needs right now, the richest 20% of the world's population consume 86% of all goods and services. The poorest 20% consume just 1.3%. People in America, us, the world's wealthy, though we only make up 5% of the world's population, we use 25% of the world's energy. And in this way, looking at it under these terms, we can regain a notion that we should address climate change because it's simply the right thing to do. And put it on those terms, then we'll start to get a depth of attention to this issue that it properly deserves. Changing our actions to save money will only get us so far. Changing them because it connects to our deepest values of what is just, wise, and true may take us all the way. This is where religion and philosophy come in. While some may see them as an obstacle, I actually see them as the solution. They're the way forward. We're not facing a technological challenge for the next form of mobility or energy production. We're facing a cultural challenge akin to the scientific revolution or the Reformation or the Age of Enlightenment. The result will not simply be the replacement of the internal combustion engine with electric drivetrains or coal-fired power plants with solar cells. The result will be a change in how we see ourselves, the environment, and how the two are interconnected. It will change the very religious and philosophical beliefs that Aldo Leopold felt were missing in 1949. Many futures are still possible, and we will not know how much we have come to change for centuries to come, but that is the point. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. Addressing the climate challenge will transpire over the course of our lives, as well as those of our children and possibly our grandchildren. Without facing up to this level of depth and this length of time, many will give up far too soon, and we will not be able to deal with the key issues. Think about the central question of climate change. Do you believe that we as a species have grown to such numbers and our technology to such power that we can alter the global climate? If you answer this question yes, then you are accepting a new and profoundly different reality for the human experience. You are accepting that we have entered what scientists are now calling the Anthropocene. They are saying that we have left the Holocene and entered a new geological epoch where the 7.5 billion people on Earth are now taking charge of Earth's ecosystems, a population that by 2050 is going to hit 10 billion people, who all want to live by the standard of living that we in the United States and North America enjoy. And if you don't think that that's going to increase the velocity at which we're running into problems, think again. Scientists are proposing this as a formal recognition. The Anthropocene is a formal recognition. And to help make sense of it, They've identified 9 planetary boundaries. These are boundaries beyond which we should not go if we want to maintain a safe operating system for human existence. 3 of them we have crossed. Species extinction, biodiversity loss. Nitrogen cycle. Humans now produce more nitrogen than natural processes. We use it in farming and in manufacturing. It flows off to the fields, goes into rivers, goes into our lakes, causes algae blooms, moves into the Mississippi, creates a massive dead zone at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Nothing can live there. And then and then the climate crisis is the third. 1 is in retreat, ozone depletion. We have addressed that issue. And then others are out there waiting. Ocean acidification, phosphorus, fresh water use. The idea that Johannesburg almost ran out of water is quite an interesting experience. This is what we're facing. This is the Anthropocene. In many ways, what we're looking at here sounds absurd, that we are doing this. But we can start to accept these things once we start to see them as the new normal, quote unquote, the new normal. And sometimes we need to do something to jolt ourselves out of that new normal, to face up to something has changed. And so I offer this. Last year, I was talking to a research chemist at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. In the midst of the conversation, he said matter-of-factly, there are measurable levels of ibuprofen in the Mediterranean Sea. I was surprised by the statement, and I was surprised by the casualness with which he said it. But he was very calm about it. He said, ibuprofen does not concern us. It's a fairly benign compound. What does concern us are birth control pills and antidepressants. You take a drug. Sometimes the drug does not degrade at all. It just passes through your system. Its mere presence does the job it's intended to do, and sometimes your body may use 10, 15, 20% of that chemical. The rest passes through and enters the treatment plant. The treatment plant can't handle it. It leaves the treatment plant and enters the aquatic ecosystem, and it changes the flora and the fauna. We are changing life forms in aquatic ecosystems, and guess what? That's where we get our drinking water and our food. Last year, biologists in Seattle were analyzing salmon, and they found within the salmon Prozac. They found 40 prescription drugs. They even found cocaine. This is the Anthropocene. These kinds of stories are shocking until we start to hear them over and over again and we start to get dull to them. For example, in 2010, in China, a market that the auto sector sees as the future growth sector or opportunity for their sector, they had a 10-day traffic jam. And the auto companies want to sell them more cars. More cars is not the answer, even if they are electric. So we grow to accept this absurd litany of destruction that is the Anthropocene. We've all heard the list before, and it tends to numb us. We either resist it because we are indifferent, because of hopelessness, or we feel a certain degree of resentment because we feel defensiveness or guilt. But we don't need to be told the problem again. We need to know how we can understand it, how we can explain it to others, and how we can come to a collective acceptance why it happened and how we can fashion a response. So while the concept of the Anthropocene moves through formal recognition by geophysical scientists, we need to understand the real work in coming to collective terms over our new reality. Neil Everden, in 1993, wrote a book called The Natural Alien, and in it he wrote something that I grabbed, if you can tell I like quotes, but he said, the environmental crisis is not simply something we can examine and resolve. We are the environmental crisis. The crisis is the visible manifestation of our very being, like territory revealing itself at the center. The environmental crisis is inherent in everything we do and believe. It is inherent in the context of our lives. He wrote that in 1993. It was very prescient. We can come forward, and Rory Rowan in 2014 made a similar statement. The Anthropocene is not a problem for which there can be a solution. Rather, it names an emergent set of geosocial conditions that already fundamentally structure the horizon of human existence. It is thus not a new factor that can be accommodated with existing conceptual frameworks, including those within which policy is developed, but signals a profound shift in the human relation to the planet that questions the very foundations of these frameworks ourselves. It is that big. The Anthropocene will change our culture and our values one way or another. There is no avoiding it. What is not yet clear is whether they will change it in ways that adequately reflect our predicament. We may look to technology and the market for answers, but they will not be enough. We need to look to religion and philosophy, as Aldo Leopold warned. And so Thomas Berry writes about this when he writes about the great work. And he writes this: the success or failure of any historic age is the extent to which those living at that time have fulfilled the special role that history has imposed upon them. It is a role given to us beyond any consultation with ourselves. We did not choose. We were chosen by some power beyond ourselves this historic task. The nobility of our lives, however, depends upon the manner in which we come to understand and fulfill that assigned role. If we were in 1942, that great work is called World War II. But we're standing here in 2018, and the great work, particularly for the next generation, is called the Anthropocene. They can resent it, that this has been delivered to them, but they have no choice. They have to respond. It is their great work. So how will we get there? What can we do? I'd like to do a little theological thought experiment, and I want to begin by saying I am not a theologian. I'm a business school professor, which may sound rather strange that I'm giving these remarks, but I do study cultures. But life in the Anthropocene is the ultimate commons problem, where our survival depends on our collective actions and the morality of individual actions take on new meanings. My mowing my lawn in Ann Arbor, Michigan now has import for people in low-lying areas of Bangladesh. Do you think we're ready for that kind of a moral framework? We've got a long way to go. The meat eaten or plastic thrown away here in Duluth have an impact on the global environment that all human and non-human life share. We are all members of the same species that is threatened by the challenges of the Anthropocene. Our survival depends on everyone's actions. Now, how do we bring such thinking into the deepest values of our purpose and meaning? Could the dominant religions of the world teach that our salvation, not just our survival, depends on our collective actions and a new sense of the morality of individual actions? Can you imagine our major religions saying that we'll be judged as a collective, not as an individual? Again, I offer this as a theological thought experiment. It is not totally radical. There is a Hindu notion of the totality of everyone's subtle bodies can be understood as one great collective soul. Ralph Waldo Emerson used to theorize about what he called the oversoul, the collective invisible soul of which all individual souls or identities are included. So could we think of Judgment Day in those terms? That would really rock our world in thinking about what we're doing as religious people. It's hard to imagine that we can get there when I look at the world today. It seems to me that collective responsibility has become coded as the antithesis and any enemy of freedom. We live in a world where 90% of all income growth between 2009 and 2012 was enjoyed by the wealthiest 1% of Americans, and they're still pushing for more tax breaks. We live in a world where people live inside gated communities and behind ever greater seawalls. We live in a world where the prosperity gospel teaches us that if we make more money, it is God showing his favor on us. So make more money and live a more wealthy lifestyle. The unprecedented and widening income gap in both the United States and the world is leading towards a widening climate gap, where the collective good seems to be increasingly overshadowed by the wants of the individual few. So how do we get out of this? Regulation doesn't seem to be working. Despite the anger of the Occupy movement, the Tea Party, the Arab Spring, the Trump-Sanders votes, Washington continues to serve the wealthy few. A 2014 Princeton University study analyzed decision by the U.S. government and came to the conclusion that our society is more an oligarchy than a democracy, where, quote unquote, the average American has little to no power. This is a challenge, this is a problem, but there is a way through. Right now, according to the Pew Center, 84% of the world population and 77% of U.S. population identifies with a particular faith. And religion may be the force against the individualistic tide. Those who still practice will connect environmental values to their religious beliefs and will act in ways that are far more powerful than any economic or regulatory pressure could create. And those who no longer practice will still have been taught at a young age about environmental right and wrong and connected to their personal philosophy. In the end, if the collective responsibility we need in the Anthropocene is connected to the teachings of the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tripitaka, sorry about that, or for those with a more secular worldview, the philosophies of Aurelius, Locke, Voltaire, Madison, Wordsworth, Thoreau, and Russell, then the world can change on its axis. It has happened before with great upheaval, and it will happen again. As an example, in the Middle Ages, humanity viewed nature as unknowable, subsuming the human endeavor and animated by mystical forces that were best explained by religious dogma, mostly by the Catholic Church. But between 16th and 18th century, that worldview changed through the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Captured by the phrase sapere audi, dare to know, this was a great step forward for mankind, allowing us to gain more control of our lives and accomplish great things through the development of a global economy that improved our standard of living and increased our lifespans. Steven Pinker is making a lot of traction right now with his new book, Enlightenment Now, extolling the virtues of what this movement set about. And it did do great things. But it did treat nature as the enemy. As Francis Bacon wrote, nature will be bound into service, hounded in her wanderings, and put on the rack and tortured for her secrets. That is the Enlightenment thinking towards nature, and it does manifest itself today. Today we are becoming aware that Enlightenment thinking does have its problems in approaching environmental problems, that the Anthropocene signals the calm before the storm, and that the metaphors of the Enlightenment are no longer adequate to understand the natural world and our impact upon it. It's not a rejection of the scientific method, but a rejection of a purely technocratic approach and the excessive belief in the reductive power of scientific knowledge to pursue an ongoing conquest of nature. At its most extreme, it's rejection of scientism, a recognition that there are limits to a purely scientific understanding of how nature works and what are we doing with it. It has a preference for quantitative over qualitative measures. It focuses on the parts instead of the whole, and it has pursuits of outcomes like efficiency, utility, and expedience. But that kind of an approach is incomplete. Though the development of new technologies may be a good thing, it is only reducing the velocity at which we are approaching a climate crisis. It is not changing course. While it certainly has a role in the latter, it will not be guided in that direction unless we adopt a complete new set of values that define its purpose. Electric cars are good, but they're still cars, with all their associated problems with congestion, materiality, and energy use. What is needed is a set of values that guide us toward living in balance with nature, not just striving for reducing carbon, but going carbon neutral and eventually going carbon negative. And we have no idea how to do this. But that is the challenge before us. It's a fundamentally different way of viewing ourselves and the problem we face. As a metaphor, consider that we have ended the war in Iraq, and now our challenge is to create the peace. And those are two fundamentally different approaches to the same problem. We need now to figure out how to end the war with the environment and create the peace. So we need new ways of viewing our Anthropocene problems and solutions, or more to the point, we need to apply other ways of knowing the world and ourselves, of which science is important, but not the only one. There are questions that quantitative science alone cannot answer, but philosophy, theology, the humanities, and the social sciences, as well as tacit, vernacular, and pragmatic knowledge can help. But they are dismissed by scientism. They flatly reject these as ways of knowing the world. Life, what is life? What is beauty? What is love? Why does music and art touch us so deeply? What is right and just? How much is enough and sufficient to make us happy and fulfilled? These are all in the domain of what makes life worth living, and all are difficult and possibly impossible terrain for quantitative logical science. That doesn't stop it from trying. I read an essay once that sought to make the case that science can explain love. Quote unquote, love is an emotion, and emotions represent brain states. While we're not at the stage yet where we can measure the underlying neural basis of emotions, we can generate some of them by injecting oxytocin, testosterone, and other chemicals. For this scientist, that was love. I reject this kind of view. This is the kind of technocratic thinking that underlies our Anthropocene crisis. It reduces human and all life to that of a mere object or a bag of chemicals. And I know that I and everyone in this room are far more than that. So while science may be able to detect the chemicals that are released when we love, or at least some of them, It is not actually detecting love or all the manifestations of love. Science cannot tell us why some people feel love and others don't, why we love one person or animal, thing, or work and not another, and why love can make life more vibrant, real, and meaningful. Taking this to the realm of the natural environment, economic and scientific thinking can lead us to see the value of a forest, for example, only in terms of its market value or its carbon value. But once we do that, it will only be protected as long as another higher economic or carbon value is found. And then we will tear it down. That reasoning, though logical, ignores the many values of the ecosystem that is a forest. It includes the complex array of life forms within it and their intricate interconnections, many of which we do not understand. And it ignores a deeper meaning and purpose that may be both inherent and derived. So the simple act of cutting down a forest and replanting it with acres and acres of corn, wheat, barley, or even more trees is not equivalent. It destroys both the ecosystem and, as Wendell Berry has made very clear, a piece of ourselves and our culture. The problem isn't that we don't know the damage we are doing, and the problem is that we don't know the damage we are doing until well after it is done and the environment and human value is lost. We are stumbling into the Anthropocene. Stephen Jay Gould captured it quite nicely. He said, "We have become, by the power of a glorious evolutionary accident called intelligence, the stewards of life's continuity on Earth. We did not ask for this role, but we cannot abjure it. We may not be suited to it, but here we are. We're stuck with it. What do we do about it? We need to adopt a bold, new, and unintended role of stewards, life continuity on Earth. We need to embark on a re-enlightenment. Viewing nature as something that is connected with who we are, not separate from it, not something to be conquered, but to something to work in balance with. In the re-enlightenment, we need to connect the two worlds, our social and our natural. Instead of viewing nature as simply a source of resources for our benefit, we need to find ways to see the value it possesses beyond human utility and efficiency. That is a much harder task than it may seem. We need to see all life as having value and interdependencies that cannot be measured in a laboratory or market exchange. The fact that we can't measure or price this value doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It needs to be examined and expressed in different ways. Just as the Romantics in the 18th and early 19th century countered scientific rationalism with knowledge that was best expressed in art, literature, and music, we need a re-engagement with all the ways of knowing the world and appreciate the entirety of nature with humans as an integral piece of the whole. Such re-enlightenment thinking will involve monumental changes in who we are as humans and will take over decades or centuries, if it ever does. The ridiculously contentious debate over climate change is a microcosm of how challenging these changes are going to be. And as we continue to delay recognition of the climate problems and the avenues for escape begin to close off, many rightly express alarm that we may not be moving fast enough and are therefore doomed. Some believe that we have already waited too long and a darker future lies ahead. Clive Hamilton has wrote quite extensively about this. He warns, quote unquote, "Those who argue for the good Anthropocene are unscientific and live in a fantasy world of their own construction. I cannot see how, in a world warmed by 4 degrees, anything can be described as good." The Anthropocene is indeed upon us. But while many fear that circumstances are becoming more dire as we delay recognition and response, we can hold out hope that the possibility of a shift in our values become possible with each passing day. The signal events of the Anthropocene are becoming increasingly hard to ignore, while the concept and its meaning for our existence are becoming easier to understand. At some point, the signals and the concepts will converge and the world will change. Perhaps we can see the signs that this is happening already. I actually believe we can. Let's compare 2 influential documents. In 1967, Lynn White wrote an article in Science magazine, and it was a real bombshell. It was called "The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis." What did he blame for our ecological crisis? The Judeo-Christian approach to the Genesis mandate. He said that taught us how to feel superior to nature and contemptuous of it, willing to use it for our slightest whim. He went on to criticize an orthodox Christian arrogance towards nature, where somehow dispelled and second, we need to move beyond that idea that science and technology alone can solve our ecological crisis. It caused quite a stir, and it still does. I don't know if students are required to read this, but it is an interesting reading. Now, that was in 1967. In 2015, Pope Francis responded, in my opinion. I don't talk to him. I don't know if he did it deliberately responding to this, but he wrote Laudato Si, or On Care for Our Common Home, which, in my opinion, laid out what amounts to a rebuttal and in the process offers some important foundations for what re-enlightenment might look like. First, he begins to acknowledge that we have a common problem. We have a collective problem and a responsibility to protect our common home. Second, he says that something is very different today, that our way of understanding human life and activity has gone awry to the serious detriment of the world around us. Something is different. 3, he argued that our prior understanding of biblical teaching has contributed to this problem. In a section with a title strangely similar to White's critique called The Human Roots of the Ecological Crisis, he wrote that the idea that the book of Genesis grants us dominion over the earth is not a correct interpretation of the Bible as understood by the church, and that its persistence has encouraged the unbridled exploitation of nature by painting man as domineering and destructive by nature. Fourth, he offered a new story for interpreting the mandate, one in which human beings are called to till and keep the garden that is for our use, where tilling refers to cultivating, plowing, or working, and keeping means caring, protecting, overseeing, and preserving. Fifth, he went on to offer a different way to think about nature, preferring the word creation to imbue it with more spiritual importance in evoking words like sacred, divine, reverence, and love as motivations to protect it. And finally, he called for a new way of thinking about human beings, life, society, and our relationship with nature to replace what he called our modern cultural ailments of rampant consumerism, unrestrained faith in technology, blind pursuit of profits, political short-sightedness, and the economic inequalities that force the world's poor to bear the brunt of an imbalanced system. Overall, the Pope offered a bold appeal to reevaluate our worldviews, our values, our spiritual beliefs, and usher in re-enlightenment in the face of the Anthropocene. And importantly, others are joining him. The message is important not only for its content, but it's for its source. The Pope, along with Jewish, Muslim, and Buddhist leaders and Hindu leaders, offered similar messages in their faith traditions that will reach the world's religious in ways that a professor from Ann Arbor cannot, or a scientist, or an environmentalist, or a Democratic politician. When people hear the message to address climate change and the Anthropocene from the church, the mosque, the synagogue, or the temple, it connects to their deepest sense of who they are and why they are alive. Religion, unlike any other institutional force in society, has the power to directly influence our values and our beliefs. So it may be hard to see right now, but perhaps re-enlightenment has already begun. We won't know if it succeeds for decades or centuries, just as no one knew how long the Enlightenment would take, nor what it would look like when it was done, nor even that they were in it at the time. The term enlightenment itself did not emerge until centuries later. Neither you nor I will see how re-enlightenment will turn out, but we can see clues if we look in the right places. And I like a quote by William Gibson. He says, "The future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed." There are signals out there that this is happening, and I hold up the Pope as just one, but you are starting to see people start to internalize and accept the new role, the unprecedented role we have in our world today. So, as I start to bring this to a close, I want to leave you with one last thought, and I think I'm doing fine on time. I am often asked, after a talk like that, are you optimistic about the future? And my answer, truthfully, is no, I am not optimistic, but I am hopeful. And those are two very, very different things. Optimism is looking at the odds and saying they're in your favor and doing something about it. Hope is choosing to ignore the odds and doing something anyway. Optimism is a calculation. It's rational. Hope is faith. David Orr at Oberlin likes to describe hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. That's the way I approach this. So, I am pessimistic but hopeful. Why am I hopeful? 2 reasons. One, I believe, and I have seen, and I have plenty of examples, that human beings, when properly motivated, can change their beliefs rapidly. Think about 9/11. Overnight, we changed our conceptions of freedom and privacy in ways that would not have been possible on 9/10. And we can do that again when properly motivated. The other reason I'm hopeful is today's young people. They come in with a sense of urgency, optimism. They see opportunities where other people see threats. They give me hope. And that is one of the beauties and the benefits of being a college professor. I'm constantly surrounded by a population that never ages. And I forget that I'm aging, but I see their enthusiasm, I see their excitement, and I see the world as they want it to be. And my job as a professor is to give them the tools and help them do it. And they can do it. The amount of changes that can happen in their life are nothing short of miraculous. To help you see that, I want to introduce you to my grandmother. And she was born in 1899, and she died in 1995. When she died, a little tiny mining town in Pennsylvania, Likens, Pennsylvania, I went to her funeral, and I thought about it. I thought, man, the changes she saw in her life. She saw the advent of indoor plumbing, the advent of indoor electrification. She saw the first automobile, man's first flight, man land on the moon, the first jet engine, the first computer, and so much more. She saw all that. Now, if I had told her when she was 19 or 20 that this would be the world she would die in, she'd say, you're out of your mind. That is never going to happen. If I went to students today, said, this is the world you will die in, they will say, you're out of your mind. That is never going to happen. It is that big. That is the amount of change that is going to happen. A child born today in the United States will, on average, live to the year 2095. Many will live into the 22nd century. How different will that world be from the one they were born into? In ways we can't even imagine. All we can really know is that the world will be different in some fundamental ways. What kind of world might that be? What will be the world in 2100? What kind of internal change and intellectual emphases, loyalties, affections, and convictions might we see? Borrowing again from Aldo Leopold. Perhaps if we got a glimpse of the year 2100, we might find that we have learned how to be a net positive influence on the environment, moving from carbon reductions to carbon neutral and then carbon negative. We might view fossil fuels as an archaic and primitive form of energy generation, preferring renewable energy in some forms that we have not yet even imagined. The personal automobile may no longer be considered an element of our personal identity, and driverless mobility may make automobile ownership obsolete. And if that happens, you'll watch the number of automobiles drop precipitously. Right now, at any moment in time, 95% of the automobiles in the fleet in the United States sit idle. Many of those can go away. And with those will go many of the roads on which they rely, certainly many of the parking lots and garages. That garage behind your house will no longer be necessary. Gas stations will disappear. Our world will be fundamentally different. Maybe in 2100 we'll value life as much as we value the lives of our cats and dogs today. Maybe we'll eat less meat or no meat at all. Maybe we'll eliminate food waste and find ways to distribute what we have to feed the world's hungriest people. Maybe we source more of what we need from local sources, thereby lowering emissions from transport and supporting more self-sufficient and resilient local communities. Perhaps all these changes would happen, and maybe at the same time, we would find that we had a similar change in our religious beliefs and our philosophical ideas. We might find, for example, that we have adopted many of the beliefs and values that religion has been trying to teach us for millennia. Maybe we'll find that we moved beyond an arrogant sense of self-interest and developed a deep sense of humility for the limits of our understanding of the world around us. Maybe we'll find that we have the prudence to leave the natural world alone as something worthy of a respect for all that we don't know about it. Maybe we'll adopt a spirit of generosity and love that leads us to care for each other, society, and the natural world, whereby acts previously considered to be impactful only on the individual are now viewed with the moral overtones of what they mean collectively. Maybe we'll develop the wisdom to see the broader connections and interdependencies of the social and natural worlds around us. Maybe we'll view humans as something internal, not external to the natural environment. Maybe the virtues of frugality, thrift, and modesty will come back into vogue, leading us to measure our self-worth by our character and not by the material goods that we own and consume. Maybe the motivations of greed, envy, and lust will be displaced by a genuine sense of sufficiency and benevolence to know when we have enough for our needs and happiness and stop comparing ourselves to the material wealth of those around us. In sense, maybe we'll have developed a sense of love for all of the life that inhabits the world that is ours, that we share with others. What a world this would be, one pursuing as a better place to live, thrive, and flourish. And that is a much more positive message than trying to scare people into changing their worldviews. There's a common way of looking at this. People are more motivated by positive messages. The most inspirational speech of all time was not called "I Have a Nightmare," it was called "I Have a Dream." And if you can envision a better world, people will gravitate towards it and they will strive towards it. And that's what religion has done. So, maybe we'll engage this process of re-enlightenment that take us there can be joined as a matter of faith, guided by a belief in what is right and just, and begin with a recognition that we might hope for it to be accomplished quickly in our lifetimes, but in reality it will not. It will take a long time. Does that mean there's no urgency to address it? Absolutely not. And I close you with words from John F. Kennedy, where he told a story of the great Marshal Lyautey, who once asked his gardener to plant a tree. And the gardener replied, "Why plant it? It won't flower for 100 years. In that case, the marshal replied, "Plant it this afternoon." Thank you very much.
Now I invite you, students especially, but everybody, of course, to come down to these microphones and ask some hard questions.
What did I do to you?
Professor, I'd be curious whether it be at the University of Michigan or even here at the College of St. Scholastica, how was sustainability policies brought into your foundation endowments and various pools of money that donors have provided to the university?
Can you try that one more time? Don't think I quite got it.
I guess my question is a lot of the discussion obviously this evening has been around sustainability, but large universities, large private colleges also control how their investments are made. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering what steps has the University of Michigan taken, or the College of St. Scholastica, to use the power of these resources to invest in companies that are really promoting environmental stewardship, social justice, and governance.
Yeah, I can't speak to St. Scholastica, I don't know, but I can talk about the University of Michigan. And I can talk about a deeper element of the question you ask, and that is one that is a very provocative question, is what is the role of the university in public and political discourse? And there are some people who think that we should stay out of that. We're not supposed to get political. I disagree with that very strongly. I think that if there is no idealism and thinking about making the world a better place on college campuses, where is it going to happen? And so the idea of using the resources of a large university like the University of Michigan to further social objectives for a just society, I think is exactly where we need to be. What that definition of that society is another set of landmines to step on of what issues should we engage in. At the University of Michigan, we have a lot of donor money coming in focusing on sustainability, so we have a lot of research institutes, whether in engineering or business or across the campus in sociology and the humanities. And so that can drive research and teaching in this topic. We can also use the campus as a laboratory for students to learn on and a place where we can exhibit our values. So for example, all new buildings have to be LEED certified, silver. It was a win, I wish it was higher. But students learn when they come into a building and see the aspects of a building that are sustainable, that this is a new way of thinking. Just something as simple as a waterless urinal, a dual-flush toilet. For many students is a revelation, and as part of their learning, of the idea that composting is actually a normal way to live and not just some freaky fringe idea. The idea that water bottles are problematic and what it causes for ocean plastic waste. Instead, bring your own water bottle and fill it up at a water station. Small things that build up into bigger things. At the University of Michigan, the students really push the agenda, and they've been pushing to divest. That's a tough nut to crack at the University of Michigan. They haven't done it yet. They've also been hesitant to sign on to the President's Climate Challenge. I can say that it's a lot easier for a school to sign on to that if they don't have a school of medicine or engineering, because those are incredible energy hogs. It's very hard to keep your carbon in check when you have that. But the students do push in other ways that are really important symbolically. Like, for example, what's the most powerful institution at the University of Michigan? If you haven't guessed it, it's called football. And now football has zero waste football games. And with that, they have signage to teach people, why are we doing this? How do you do it? And hopefully they'll take it home. And so, and in the food systems, try and source as much food locally. Get something as simple as getting rid of trays. Cuts down on waste. When you have a buffet and you have a tray, you load it up, and half of it goes into the garbage. If you have to actually carry it in a less convenient way, you will eat less. Data shows that. Do research to show how behavior changes. So we are also, with our procurement, we have what's called a vendor code of conduct. If we have a vendor, and again, the Michigan Block M is the second most profitable brand in college sports. Texas Longhorns is number one. But the Block M brings in a considerable amount of money, which has considerable power in the marketplace. So whether it's Adidas or Nike, if they're going to make clothing for us, they have to abide by a certain set of standards on labor practices, environmental practices, and we have a mechanism in place because we want the students to be part of this, where if they see something they don't like, they can file a complaint, and it will be taken seriously, and off we go. It's messy. I've been on committees. Students can be quite strident. But they can keep us honest, and we can teach them that they can change the world around them, so that they hopefully will leave not as passive participants in our society, but active drivers in changing that society. That's what's coming to the top of my head. I'm sure there's more, but I think there's plenty that a university can do to try and be a positive force in society. And it's important to recognize that there are some people who don't like us doing that. There are some people that think that there's some people in state governments that think that we shouldn't do research. We should just teach. We should just teach facts. If you saw this past December, there was a survey that found that 58% of registered Republican voters think that universities are a net negative influence on society. Why? Because they see us as bastions of liberalism, promoting a liberal agenda. They see sustainability as a liberal agenda. Climate change is a liberal hoax. We need to deal with that. We need to understand that. We need to be more conservatives on the campus to foster dialogue, to break down the divides that happen in our country. That is a space that a university occupies uniquely. It's safe terrain for business, nonprofits, government, activist groups all to come together. Dow can't do that. Ford can't do that. The Environmental Defense Fund can't do that. I would argue that some governments can't do that as well. So that's another place we could play a role in trying to cure what ails us as a society. So hopefully that will give you some thoughts. Hi.
So one of the things that's really interesting about living here is that we are in the 1854 ceded territory of the Anishinaabe people.
I'm sorry, I'm going to say that one more time.
The 1854 ceded territory of the Anishinaabe people. And so what that means is that there's in this area, and also in Upper Michigan and a little tiny bit of the top of Michigan, there's retained rights. And those retained rights have helped maintain a continuous culture that includes a spiritual culture. That I think offers another perspective from what you're talking about, what the Pope was saying or what the 1967 paper in Science was saying, where nature is central. However, of course, if you're not from that tradition, the participation in those spiritual practices can be seen as co-option, reasonably so. And so I think there's also a role in what you're saying of not speaking on behalf of people, but elevating voices that can express that spirituality. And I guess it's not so much a question as just like, hey, here's a thing to react to.
I wrote it down. You're absolutely right. because I didn't want to just think of the major religions of the world, but what animates our core? What religious values, what philosophies, and certainly the indigenous belief systems have a role in this, as do many others. If you look at the role that religious beliefs have played in changing our culture, there are too many to count. And I just spent 2 months in Vancouver, and Canada is big on this. Every event begins with a recognition of the First Nations that occupied that land before we got there. And they have much to offer the conversation. And I also like what they bring to it, and that they have brought in, the reason for maintaining certain hunting rights or fishing rights is connected to their sense of who they are. It's connected to something very, very deep. This isn't something superfluous that they're just laying on to make a buck off of catching fish. This is central to who they are. How can we take that approach, that thinking, and bring it into our world? We could learn a lot from them, so thank you for that.
Other questions?
I want to thank you for the wonderful, thought-provoking talk you just gave. And what comes to my mind is that technology is a wedge. And how does technology play a role? I mean, nowadays we ride around encased in glass and metal, and our houses separate us from the world. And it seems like technology has always kind of been a step away from that connection to the natural world, to creation. And does technology, seems like it has a role, or it has to have a role for humanity to get back there, but is a rejection of technology in the works as well as part of this reconnecting with creation? Not sure if I stated that well.
No, you stated it very well, because you've exposed a very difficult question. Because there's a pragmatic answer to that, and that is you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You're not going to put it away. But also, I don't know if we want to. You know, there is a question that is embedded within my talk, is how do you live an authentic life based on your values? I flew here. I'm breathing. I ate food tonight. Our existence does impact the environment. Does that make me a hypocrite? I don't think so. Earth First has a bumper sticker. It says, "Save the planet, kill yourself." I would think that's not the answer. But if from a purely technical point of view, it actually holds water. But if the only way someone's going to listen to me is if I move into a cave and wear a hair shirt, that's not the answer either. We're all part of a collective, and how do we do it? Part of that collective is technology, and it is social media. And every technology changes our society. It changes our culture. The automobile created suburbia. The birth control pill ushered in the sexual revolution. I just wrote an essay that got a lot of unfriendly responses, but I made a comparison between the printing press and social media and the Catholic Church and academic scientists. Prior to the printing press, the only ones with access to the Gospels were the Catholic Church. And so everyday people that wanted to understand the Gospels had to hear it from a priest. And then the printing press came along, and now people could get the Bible to themselves in their native language. Gutenberg printed it in German. And then Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, started printing pamphlets of alternative views. And the Catholic Church was now one voice among many. What did the Catholic Church do? It tried to shut down printing presses. It tried to ostracize those that had contrary views. It tried to resist the change that they could not stop. What is happening today? Social media now allows anybody to get whatever kind of science they want. And what are academics doing? They're saying they're dumb, they're illiterate, they shouldn't be able to do this. Ask any doctor who prescribes a treatment plan for a particular ailment, and they will tell you, the patient will come back and say, well, I have a different idea because I read WebMD and I have a different approach. Ask anyone who chooses not to vaccinate their child because of fear of autism. Ask anyone who denies climate change, and they will line up the scientific facts to make their case. Now, we can cede the space and say, give up, that it's just a wasteland. We don't have that option. We have to get in there and engage and teach people how to be more discerning consumers of scientific knowledge on the web. I also hold out hope that we will find a way to use social media as a collective commons for us to work this out. There's an interesting analogy. Where did the conversations of the Enlightenment happen? They did not happen at the great learning institutions of the world. They happened in the salons of Europe and in the taverns of the United States. Where might the conversation over the re-enlightenment of the Anthropocene take place? It may happen on the internet. It's quite possible. I don't think it's going to happen on college campuses. I think that the thinking is so far out of the box, we will be part of it, but we won't be the only ones. And so we have to accept this new reality and start to jump in. Now, right now, social media does divide us. Who you choose as Facebook friends and Twitter followers does put you into a bubble. And we have to figure out how to crack that bubble so that people start to have more common conversations. There are studies to show that who you see as a reputable news source changes your belief on climate change. There is statistically significant data to show the more you watch Fox News, the less you believe in climate change. The more you listen to NPR, the more you believe in climate change. And that is a lot of that's through the web. So how does the web start to shift? How do we turn the comments section into something useful and productive? It can be done. I just think it's so new, we're still trying to figure it out. Every generation enters a new world where the previous generation says you're going to be ruined. Whether it's drugs or alcohol or sex, every generation was going to be ruined by these things, and we seem to have worked them out. We'll work this one out too. I do think that young people will figure this one out. I already start to see it happening. You can state a fact, and someone will come right back and say, where'd you get that? And there will be a conversation not only on the content, but on the credibility of the information you brought to the conversation. How do we go from there? And how do we change the comment section? NPR has eliminated the comment section. I think that's a terrible idea. I think the idea of just totally anonymous, shoot from the hip kind of comments is a bad idea too. But how do we have something in the middle where we actually have an accountable common space where people can exchange ideas? It can happen. It will happen. So I do think that we'll start to figure this out. Whether that's going to be ending Facebook as we know it, we may be watching the end of that right now. I have no idea. But it is there. You're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. The question is, how do we turn it to good rather than ill? Oop.
I have a not tremendously clear question, but I graduated from the University of Michigan in the 1960s, and I had not one woman professor. And at that time, I didn't even realize that I had no women professors. And I think the change in gender roles has been fast, but I think that you cannot address questions of religious values or philosophy without looking fundamentally at the issue of how we look at men and women. I also think that the climate, the issue of the sustainability of the earth has a lot to do with women's ability to make decisions about their procreation. And so I didn't hear any of that in your speech, and I'd like to have you address a little bit those questions about the importance of looking at that movement and change.
So I'm on a Catholic campus, and you want me to talk about contraception? Okay. Fair enough. The world population is a central element of the challenge we face. That cannot be denied. We're 7.5 billion people. And in 30 years, we're going to be 10 billion people. 10 billion. It's going to go up by 2.5 billion people. You cannot have this conversation without thinking about population. And so how do we think, I want to be polite to my hosts, but I don't think that we can talk about this without thinking about family planning and more control. And that has other aspects to it as well. It's not just the number of babies, but a woman's control over life and her ability to have other elements of her life, which can start to bring in things like, paid leave, family care, things like that. So I don't see these as separate. I don't see it as something not part of this conversation. And maybe I should bring it in more centrally, because from the beginning of the environmental movement, there's been a loud voice saying, you got to talk about population. Population is a central part of this. How do we bring population in? And people dance around it, but it is a part of this. It has to be. And so I actually don't see anything provocative in what you're saying, but I do want to be careful not to forget where I am.
Right, and it's not just birth control. I think it's feminine consciousness and the way in which our religious traditions have been deeply patriarchal, and that reflects attitudes towards the earth and attitudes towards women are, I think, intertwined. And I'm just think it needs to be addressed in a holistic way for the value of the life of women beyond.
And so now you want me
their capacity to reproduce. You know.
And now you want me to talk about Catholic or women priests, maybe?
Well, no. No, but within the traditions, yeah.
Sure. No, your point is well taken. Yes.
I would just like to make the observation, or suggest to people that make the observation when they go to the restroom, who makes the paper towels. And you can decide what to do with that information.
It sounds like an inside story. Who makes the paper towels? Okay.
I want to thank you for bringing in Pope Francis into the dialogue this evening. He has done a great deal. Many of his encyclicals begin with, this is addressed to all people of goodwill, not just to Catholics, but to Christians. And he's doing a lot for interfaith dialogue. But I also want to say that on many Catholic universities, there is a great interaction between science and religion. And in the Omega movement, for instance, and a new, the joining of theologians who are not afraid of science and are looking at the new scientific experiments that are being done that make Christianity more relevant to our current needs and our current population, everything in the world. So I'd like to say that we need to do more of that. It's exciting to see how some of the findings of modern quantum physics and so on are showing how the whole world is so interrelated, that God's plan for the universe is for us all to work together. Mm-hmm. And as Christians, we believe that one of the last words of Christ were that, Father, that they all may be one. And it's a religion of love, and it is only love and concern that will bring this about. Mm-hmm. So thank you.
Okay, and I would just simply add to that, I mean, amen. Faith and reason, finding a way to work it out. I can tell you that as a religious Catholic on a secular university, it's sometimes challenging. There are many within the academy who dismiss religion as having no empirical data, therefore irrelevant to the conversation. That essay I wrote on the printing press, someone actually in the comments section went at me and said, well, I've done some research on Hoffman. He's a Catholic, so he must have a quote-unquote Catholic view of science. I don't know exactly what that is, but he coded it as anti-science, which I think is nonsense, and I don't think there's anything problematic by believing in science and believing in God. And John Paul II started a dialogue on this, on faith and reason, and I think we should continue it, and there's plenty of room to put the two together. So I agree with you entirely.
We have two more questions.
Okay.
One of you.
So I was just wondering if you could sort of discuss the interrelation between sort of anti-science sentiment, sort of like...
I'm sorry, what?
Anti-science sentiment, so like information processing. You talked about Fox News and NPR, I guess.
Okay.
And how and then versus morality. So like an individual probably doesn't want humanity to end who doesn't believe in climate change, but they still don't believe in climate change. Does that make sense? They love their family and they want them to survive for a while, but they don't believe in climate change. Does that make sense? So there's a balance between their morality and then what they believe scientifically. Does that make sense? And if you could describe sort of the...
So they believe in climate change, but they don't want to do anything about it?
They don't believe in climate change, but they want everyone to live a long life, I guess. Does that make sense?
Well, I would put it the other way around. There are a lot of people who don't believe in climate change because they don't want to hamper the economy, that they think that the economy does good things for them, and so addressing climate change will ruin the economy.
I guess what I'm saying is climate change is clearly bad for humanity.
Yeah.
If you believe in it. But if you don't believe in it, it's the contradiction between loving your family, wanting them to live a long time, versus, and then not believing in climate change.
Well,
Does that make sense? It's a contradiction.
you know, one of the challenges of communicating climate change to people is that you can't see CO2, you can't feel global mean temperature go up. You can see storms, but it's very hard to pinpoint that one storm is being caused by climate change. So how do you make it salient? How do you make it personally salient? And there are different frames you can do this. It can be an issue of national security, economic competitiveness. One frame that is very powerful is the health frame. If climate change happens, we'll have elevated temperatures in urban centers, and the vulnerable population will get sick and they will die, as has happened in Paris and Chicago and elsewhere. That vulnerable population is called our grandparents and our children. And now you've made it personally salient, and now people can start to accept that. And so the idea of making a world a better place for future generations, that line I had, that one generation at one point in time satisfying their interests and their needs or their wants and compromising the ability of future generations is part of this equation. But, you know, this is a complex issue. It is not simply a scientific issue. It does have many layered elements to it that have to be recognized in the conversation. And people satisfice. They make ways of trying to make sense out of things by demoting some ideas and elevating others. And one of the rubs of climate change is to address it, we have to have pain now for a gain later that may or may not reveal itself. So it's uncertain and it's in the future, and for the most part, it's going to happen to somebody else. The impacts on us on climate change are going to be modest compared to what's going to happen in Bangladesh, in the small island states, in parts of Asia. And so to ask people to give up what they have, that's a really heavy lift. And so trying to put that all together in a way that gets people to recognize that they have something to leave to future generations, it is a powerful motivator. There are plenty of stories of people who have been motivated by their children or their grandchildren. There's one of the partners at Kleiner Perkins does a talk on this. You can look it up on John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins. And he talks about, you know, he's at one of the biggest investment firms in the world. And he started to address climate change. Why? And he actually started to tear up because his daughter started to lay into him and said, your generation did this. What are you doing to fix it? And he really felt some guilt about that. And he actually started to say, I got to do something about this. And I know for a fact certain activists who have worked with the children of senior executives of corporations to get them to wake up to the issue. This is my world you're working on. This is my world you're going to impact. What are you going to do to leave me a better world? So it's a very powerful metaphor because now you put it on the human plane. And that I love. I love the people I love, and I will protect the world to protect the people that I love. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I might answer more afterwards. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So I guess I always think things in terms of justice, and what we're doing is often unjust, especially when it comes to keeping costs low in the U.S. because we want to have lots of nice things, but we don't want to pay a lot of money for them. And so I guess one of the things that your lecture raised to me is we export a lot of pollution, and we do this to keep costs low for us when we're buying our clothing or whatever, and obviously we're all guilty of this because unless it's handmade or made by really small companies here at home, we don't know how these factories are producing things. So I guess I want to know why this doesn't produce a moral dilemma. Like, why do we as Christians ignore this as a problem? Because it is a problem that we see keeping things nice for ourselves as a reason to make things worse elsewhere. So I just want to know what you think about, I guess, sharing the moral dilemma of this with other people.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a great question. I think justice is a great way to approach this issue of fairness, global fairness. We are emerging into a world that your generation may take for granted, but the world has suddenly become very, very small. And social media allows us to see anything, any place, at any time. Many of us in this room did not grow up in that world. You did. And that is bringing with it a different kind of awareness of the imbalance and the injustice in the world and the unfairness. And people seeing that other people are living a lifestyle, I'd like to have that lifestyle. I'd like to know that my children will grow to adulthood. But we live in a very complex society. Max Weber, who was a German sociologist at the turn of the last century, the 1900s, said that we get through our world by activating black boxes. And what he meant by that is that there are many things that we use to get through our day, and we have no understanding of how they work. I get in my car, turn on the engine, I don't know how it works, but the car gets me where I need to go. I get to the airport, I don't know how TSA works, I don't know how a jet engine works, but miraculously it lands me at Duluth Airport. Tom comes to pick me up. I don't know what was going on in his life, but he got there and he took me to a hotel that's nice and warm and has a nice bed. And I ate food, and I'm wearing clothes. I don't know how these clothes got here. I don't know how that food got there. If we had to open every single black box, we'd become an emotional cripple. If you couldn't eat any food until you knew exactly the environmental and social implications of that food, you'd be a very hungry person. If you couldn't buy clothes unless you knew that, you'd have a very spare wardrobe, if one at all. Climate change, these issues are asking us to open black boxes that we've never opened before, and we don't like doing it. Psychologists like to describe us, we're cognitive misers. We have a certain amount of cognitive ability, and we don't like to spend it unnecessarily. We get angry when that happens. I can give you a personal example. I distinctly remember the first time I went to an organic food store. And I walked down to the cereal aisle, and what was previously an automatic decision, I walk up, I grab my Cheerios, I'm out the door, now required thought. I was looking at a wall of cereals I'd never seen before. And how do I make a decision? And it ticked me off. It was spending time and energy I didn't want to do. And so people take shortcuts. Is climate change real or not? Well, my pastor says it's not. That's good enough for me. Or the mayor says it's not. Or my neighbor, I really trust him. He really knows science. I'm going to go with that. And if we had to open those black boxes, we wouldn't be able to do it. Now you're asking people to do it. And that's, I think, where religion has so much to offer. Because what does religion challenge us to do? It challenges us to be present and thoughtful, to be aware. To be aware of the moral implications of everything we do. Was that a lie? Well, it was a white lie, but no, it's a lie. I mean, thou shalt not lie. I mean, the commands are pretty strict. And none of us are perfect, and we all struggle with it. And to bring the idea of environment into that gives us the same challenge. How do we now develop a new understanding of our lifestyle? That is leading me towards eating less meat, hopefully towards eating no meat. But that's my choice. Because an element of this conversation that drives me up the wall is when people start to get self-righteous. I'm sustainable, you're not. And that line always happens to be conveniently where they sit. And my answer always is, let's talk to someone from India about how sustainable they really think you are. And everyone has to find their own way. It's like I'm saying, you know what, I'm more Catholic than you because the line happens to be right here. That's an impossible statement. And same with sustainability. So all it does is provoke you to think carefully about what were previously automatic decisions. Do you need to drive everywhere you go? Maybe you should have a bicycle. You should be thoughtful about what you eat. You should be thoughtful about what you buy. Maybe you should be more educated on carbon footprints. This is all a gradual process. You can't do it overnight. The worst thing you can do is, just like a New Year's resolution, drop these amazing tasks on yourself. You will fail and you will quit. Accept that you're flawed, you will fail, make little steps, grow your awareness, do it quietly, do it humbly. And that's where I think these values come in. In many ways, it's almost like going back to what my grandmother taught me. Waste not, want what. A penny saved is a penny earned. These are just simple lessons. Go back to the generations that grew up in the Depression. They lived with less, and they valued ideas like thrift and modesty and humility. And we live in a society that seems to have become fairly grotesque and vulgar in its exaltation of the opposites of those values. And maybe we'll get a long way if we just go back to the basics. But think about it in a new way. How does the environment fit in? That's what Pope Francis brings to this conversation. The environment has a place in that. And I think that that's all I'm trying to push here. It's actually not a revolutionary message at all. It's actually a very simple one, and it's millennia old. And strange, I'm sure a lot of you are scratching your heads going, how in the world did a business professor from the University of Michigan come and talk to me about that? But that's where we are. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for coming. gave you the list of all the other things that are coming up, so I won't repeat that. So what's coming up is a little time in the foyer there to have some sustainable celery or whatever they have to offer there, and maybe sell a book or two. Okay? Thank you for coming.